Hello, everyone. This is Pam with InfoTrust. Thank you for joining our webinar today on 2 ways your marketing team should be utilizing Google Cloud. We're going to go ahead and get started. So before we begin, I will tell you a little bit about me. My name is Pam Castricone. I am a lead consultant and data scientist at InfoTrust, and I work with some of the largest companies in the world. My professional interests are in statistics, predictive analytics, and machine learning. And outside of work, I'm an adjunct at the University of Cincinnati's Lindner College of Business, where I teach a graduate course on digital analytics with one of my colleagues. And I am also a Google Cloud Platform certified data engineer. And to tell you a little bit more about InfoTrust, we are an independent global end-to-end digital analytics consultancy. And one of the things that really sets us apart is that we don't sell any media. So our focus is solely on measurement and driving value and growing ROI within the organization. We have expertise in a number of different areas, and today we'll be focused on cloud for marketing, but we are also certified Google partners, certified in all of those GMP products, as well as certified Google Cloud partners. The agenda for today's webinar will first cover basically how we think about analytics maturity with Google Marketing Platform and with Google Cloud. Then we'll discuss the integration between Google Analytics 360 and BigQuery. Then we'll go through the 2 best-in-class marketing use cases. And finally, we'll cover some concrete next steps on how to get started. So beginning with how we think about digital analytics strategy. So at InfoTrust, we've had the opportunity to work with numerous large organizations on their digital strategy. And from that, we've been able to distill down the 6 ingredients of what digital strategy is. And we call them the 6 Ps, which are purpose, people, platforms, and process, and then pace and payoff. And so the reason that the 6 Ps are important is because they cover all the different things that need to be considered with a digital analytics strategy and can help you understand where your organization is right now. And then once you know that, you can start to map out, well, where am I trying to get to in terms of my analytics maturity and the capabilities that I want to be able to deliver on. So to talk a little bit more about what we mean by analytics maturity, we think about it as a continuum with 4 main stages. So over at the left, the most basic analytics users, we call them nascent. And as companies begin doing more with their analytics, growing their capabilities, integrating with more platforms, they grow in their analytics journey and are able to take on more sophisticated type projects and initiatives, and likewise get more value. So as you move to the right toward the multi-moment phase, that's where you're able to realize the most value from your analytics. So the use cases that we'll be talking through today fall in this multi-moment bucket of our measurement maturity framework. When I talk with our partners about Google Cloud Platform, I like to also apply this idea of a maturity framework to how they use Google Cloud. And so kind of shifting our focus to Google Cloud in particular, we can also think of organizations having different, being in different places on their cloud maturity as well. So we would consider those companies that are just getting started with cloud, maybe they're only using BigQuery, as being in a cloud nascent stage. And we work with them to help them get more value from cloud by using other solutions and other products within cloud, so that they can scale, they can be more automated, and ultimately just drive higher ROI from the different models and processes that they're running in cloud. So one thing I do want to call out here is When we talked about the analytics maturity framework, we were definitely operating for today's webinar in the multi-moment bucket. But when we talk about cloud, that's not necessarily the case. So the use cases that we'll talk through today are achievable, with varying degrees to companies that are within each of these phases of their cloud maturity. So what I mean by that is, of course, you can deliver on these marketing use cases if you're multi-moment, but that doesn't mean if you are in a nascent or an emerging stage that you can't get started right now. What you put together right now might not be fully scalable, might not be fully automated, but that doesn't mean that you can't do a proof of concept, start seeing the value from using cloud, and then begin to build in more automation, build it up so that you can scale it across your organization. So just to be clear, there are ways that you can do these types of projects that don't require you to be completely in the connected or multi-moment stage of your cloud maturity. So before we dive in, I want to share 3 learnings that we've had about how to be best in class. So the first one is measure and plan for long-term success. So this comes back to what I was just mentioning about scaling and automation. So when you're thinking about taking on cloud projects, kind of having that end goal in mind, that we want to be able to scale this, we want to be able to automate this down the road, and so that you can set things up early on that will facilitate those steps in a later phase. The second one is building a digital stack that is easy to use, connects you with ideal customers, and drives targeting. So the reason we call this out is because it's all about integrations and the power that comes from integrating different systems. The use cases that we'll talk through today fit together very nicely because we're talking about Google Marketing Platform and Google Cloud. But if we were talking about different disparate platforms that aren't as easy to integrate together, it would be a completely different conversation. It would not be nearly as seamless as what we're going to talk through today. So all of that comes back to just keeping in mind that when you're making decisions about your digital stack, take into consideration, how easy is it to pass data from one platform to another? Because if you don't, every time when you can't pass data in between, that's a barrier to actionability. And then the final piece here is making sure to analyze all marketing channels and how they drive sales, conversions, and long-term value. And this one really gets back to keeping sight of the first P in our digital analytics strategy, purpose. Not losing sight of what our objectives are, and making sure to continue to monitor, measure them, because if you're not measuring it, then you can't be optimizing against it. That being said, let's move into our next section on the integration between Google Analytics 360 and BigQuery. So I want to start off by just talking a little bit about what BigQuery is. So BigQuery is a product within Google Cloud Platform, and it is Google's enterprise data warehouse. And so it can be used for a number of different use cases, but for data lakes and then just simply as a data warehouse. A couple things that set it apart. First off, it is a fully managed service. Google has a variety of storage solutions within Google Cloud, but that's one of the things that sets BigQuery apart, is that it's fully managed. What I like about it is that it's cloud-based and interactive, and that the analyst in me really appreciates the fact that it is fast. You can store enormous amounts of data in BigQuery. You can query that information quickly. You can write information quickly. And it uses an SQL style query language. So if you have teams that are already familiar with SQL, it's pretty easy to get started with BigQuery. Couple other things to take into consideration. It is reliable and secure, so they handle reliability through replication as well as security through their controlled access. So basically, if you have a cloud project and you have different data sets in there, you can control which of your users can access your different data sets. And then finally, it's scalable and less expensive than some other cloud storage solutions out there. So overall, there are a lot of benefits to BigQuery on its own. But what we're really here to talk about today is what are the benefits of BigQuery when it's integrated with Google Analytics 360. So from an analyst perspective, a major benefit is that when you set up the integration between the two products, BigQuery, you'll be able to start receiving your unsampled hit-level analytics data in BigQuery. And so the reason this is important is because if you're familiar with the Google Analytics UI, if you're familiar with the different reporting APIs, you can get a tremendous amount of data from GA, through the UI and through the APIs, but you cannot get to this level of granularity that you can get to with BigQuery. And so when it comes to wanting to take on modeling projects or more advanced analysis projects, your analysts need to be able to get to that hit level data so they can build data sets, to answer your business questions or to build their models. So if you want to know hit by hit exactly what users are doing on the website, then you need to go to BigQuery to get to that level of detail. Other benefits that come along from the integration. So once you have that hit level data in BigQuery, it makes it easier to integrate with other data sources. So if you have any data lakes, CRM, anything else you have out there, that opens the door for those types of integrations. And then from the GA side, this integration opens up more capabilities for advanced audiences. So if you've done those integrations, now you can go and target customers, based on your CRM or other first-party data in the other ad platforms, because you're passing that data. You can pass that data back into GA. Coming back to the point about setting up for long-term success, when you're using BigQuery and you can use it in conjunction with the other products within Google Cloud, you can start to automate your modeling and automate your audience creation. So you can get your models running, pushing data into Google Analytics 360 at a regular, time interval, whether that's daily, weekly, whatever, and then that can get fed right back into your audiences that you're using for targeting. And then the final piece of this is site personalization via Optimize 360. So you can do personalization, or you can do targeted experiments based on the users you identify through your advanced analysis or your modeling. So there are a lot of benefits to setting up the integration between GA360 and BigQuery. It's pretty simple to set up. And once you create your BigQuery project, tie that project to Google Analytics 360 through the interface, you'll start receiving data in BigQuery that you can begin working with. One note, I do start to see some questions coming in. Feel free to send them. We will take time for questions at the end of the webinar. Okay, so next I want to move into those best-in-class marketing use cases. So the first one is customer lifetime value. So I like to start every discussion of customer lifetime value with the definition of what we mean by CLV or LTV, as it's sometimes called. So I've heard people use this term to mean different things. So to be super clear, what we mean when we say CLV is a single metric that represents both what that customer has spent in the past, as well as the present value of the future cash flows that we believe that customer will have. So what's key here is that we are not just talking about past behavior, we're talking about past plus future to get this holistic view of the customer and their value to the organization. The reason why CLV is important is because it comes back to this idea of focusing on long-term success. So when we have a metric like CLV that represents both past and future, it allows us to shift our focus. So we're no longer focused on just driving the next conversion. We're focused on who are those customers that are going to drive value for my organization for years to come. And the reason this is important is because it's simply not cost efficient or frankly even possible to design the optimal customer experience for everyone. So being able to run CLV models, differentiate customers based on their value and their potential for future value allows you to make better decisions on where to invest. And then finally, on top of that, once we can identify who those customers are, we can target them so that they continue to create that value for the company long term that we know they have the potential to. So when I think about CLV, one concept that you might already be familiar with that you can relate it to is the Pareto Principle, sometimes called the 80-20 rule. And the 80-20 rule states that across a variety of domains, it has been observed that quite often there is a small subset of a population that drives a disproportionate amount of the overall value for the population. So what I mean by that is we might find that the top 20% of your customer base is actually responsible for 70 to 80% of the overall revenue for your organization. So hence that top 20% is actually responsible for 80% of the value. And having a metric like CLV allows us to identify who those top 20% are. And again, with more sophistication than just historical metrics, right? We can layer in, well, what do we believe that they will do in the future? And let that also come into play when we want to target them or adjust our strategies for long-term success. Likewise, if we drill into that 20%, we'll continue to see that pattern that the top 10%, even more so, is driving a disproportionate amount of the value. So CLV gives us the tools that we can use, to act on the Pareto Principle and actually put it into action. Next, I want to talk about how we actually measure and predict CLV. As we had discussed at the beginning, CLV covers both pieces, the historical and the future value for a customer. So, of course, we're going to take into account their historical value, but to get to the future piece, we take into account three different things. First, their churn risk. So what is the probability that they've actually already churned and they're no longer a customer? So that's the first piece. Secondly, we model their purchase propensity. So how many future transactions do we believe they'll make over time? And then the third piece that gets rolled up into CLV is their spending habits. So across those transactions that we believe they'll make, how much do we believe they'll spend on each of those transactions? So by combining these three, churn risk, purchase propensity, and spending habits, we can get to a predicted CLV that covers, their value into the future, add that with what they've done in the past, and that's how we get to their overall CLV metric. As an example, Suppose we had two customers, A and B, and to date, they've both spent between $600 and $700. So from this kind of high-level summary metric of historical value, they look pretty similar. However, based on the patterns in their purchase history, their CLV tells a completely different story. So customer A is a lot more likely to still be an active customer and has greater purchase potential over the next 24 months. So by running a CLV model, being able to understand their purchasing habits and their potential for future revenue, we actually come to pretty different conclusions. Customer A, we predict, is going to drive $400 more in revenue than customer B over the 24 months that, or over their lifetime that we're predicting over. And the reason this matters is because, based on the information we started with, it was not clear that maybe these two different customers should have different strategies because they, are driving different levels of value to the business. So the next question I often get when talking about CLV is, well, what do I need to get started? And the great thing about CLV is that from a data perspective, you can build your first CLV model with a really simple data set. The bare minimum you need to get started is just a user level transaction history. So 3 columns of data: your customer ID, the date that purchases occurred, and how much was spent on each of those purchases. And so what the models do is that they transform this purchase history into an RFM summary, so calculating recency, frequency, and monetary value statistics, and then those get fed into the model. So, that's it. You can get started with your first CLV model just with your user level transaction history. When it comes to actually fitting and running the models, I would say it comes back to your level of cloud analytics maturity where you want to do this work. You can certainly do it fully within Google Cloud if you wanted, but I also have done projects where the client didn't have that much data, and we could do our model fitting locally and then just upload those results back into BigQuery. So this is certainly a project that could be done at different levels along the cloud maturity framework. And in terms of the data you need to get started, I think it's pretty attainable. So once you have done that, the next step would be to pass your CLV predictions back into Google Analytics 360. So here is just an example, we're storing it as a custom dimension. So once we have that data back in GA360, we can use that as the gateway for creating audiences and passing them to other platforms. So just as a high-level breakdown of like the ecosystem and how all of this can come together, what I'm trying to show here is that over on the left, we have our data. So for CLV, it's going to be a simpler ecosystem. We might just have customer data, but we're going to pass that into GA, do our modeling, and then pass the results of our model back into GA, which then can pass it over to our other platforms for re-engagement and conversions. So that's kind of the general flow that will be consistent even with our next use case, is that we take all of our data that's either lives in GA or in other sources, we do our modeling on it, pass our results back into GA, which can then communicate with our other platforms so that we can action on it there. So once we've done that, let's take a second to talk about, well, what do you do with it? So one of the things that I always talk with my clients about is, the beauty of a CLV model is that now we can basically rank our customers. and from most valuable to least valuable, most potential to least potential. And when we do that, we can create audiences and target those audiences with specific strategies based on how we believe they'll behave. So with our high CLV customers, that might mean targeting them with the loyalty program, nurturing them, keeping them engaged, because they have a lot of potential for the future. For the medium group, it's kind of an in-between strategy. The goal would be to nurture them so that they grow into being high CLV customers, but they're not quite there yet. And then finally, with the low CLV customers, they don't have as much potential. We're not as sure, how many future purchases they'll make, when they will make them. There's just a lot more uncertainty, and just kind of less overall predicted value coming from them. So they would get certainly a different strategy. We target them with less expensive forms of media, accordingly. So thinking back to the Pareto Principle and our 80-20 rule, I would definitely expect that 80% of our population, maybe even more, is in this low CLV bucket, and that our top 10, 20% is here in the high and medium groups. So again, being able to build these models allows you to kind of identify who those high value customers are and then target them accordingly. Okay, so to wrap up our discussion of CLV, what we've talked through so far is that CLV allows you to take your customers' purchase histories and predict their future transactions and spend. And the reason this is so important is because now you can better tailor your marketing efforts to keep those customers engaged. And that the value of storing this information in BigQuery, leveraging the value between BigQuery and Google Analytics 360, is that once we get that data back into 360, that's the gateway for reaching those customers across the whole Google stack. And kind of sum it all together, really what we're trying to do here is find those customers that are creating value for the company long term. CLV is one way that we can do that. And so just to reiterate, basic needs for this project, we need that user level transaction history. And then we do need historical data. So we recommend including at least 8 purchase cycles in our data set, and more is better. And the reason for that is the model is going to look for patterns in how frequently customers purchase, and basically what is the timing regularity of those purchases. So we need to have an ample amount of data so that the model can accurately measure and estimate how people behave in your customer base. So that's very important. But once we get the data, from there, you need a data scientist who can fit and evaluate the models, typically done in R or Python. You need an analyst who can import the CLV predictions into GA360. And that's it. Okay, so now that we've talked through CLV, I want to move on to our next marketing use case, which is propensity modeling. So like we began our discussion of CLV, I want to start by defining exactly what I mean by propensity modeling, because this is another term that I've heard used to mean different things. So what we're talking about today is basically the application of different types of models that are focused on predicting whether someone will take a particular action. And so the action we're usually interested in is a conversion. So will they purchase, or will they sign up for a newsletter? Will they submit a lead generation form? So the idea here is that we are measuring what is this person's propensity to convert. So that's the one major use case that comes out of propensity modeling. But the other thing that's also very valuable from going through this type of project is that when you build this model, you can use the outputs and the results of the model to understand and measure how particular interactions on the user's journey are impacting their likelihood to convert. So we'll talk more about this, but one of the things that's so powerful about propensity modeling is that it does two things. It does predictions, but then it also has these explanatory capabilities where you can just better understand the user's journey. So why is this important? Why would we want to build a propensity model? So just like we had talked about with CLB, but kind of in a different lens or a different focus, when we know how likely someone is to convert, we can focus on the right customers at the right time. So that is very key when we're talking about retargeting. But the other piece here is that explanatory element that when we understand the user's journey and that there might be elements of that journey that are helping or hindering them on their way to conversion, knowing that, we can build better customer experiences. So the way the propensity modeling works is that the first step is to build a large customer data set. And so this is a use case where having the unsampled hit level data in BigQuery is absolutely essential. So your data scientist or your analyst will build this data set that includes whether or not the user converted and predictors that are the different behaviors they may have taken on their journey to conversion. So once we have that data set, we can run our model, and then the model can quantify and measure the impact of those different predictors, the different user interactions on the way to conversions, and be able to tell us what was the impact of the user interacting with a live chat or going to a blog page. So once we have those user level predictions, and the predictions are actually a score. So we get a score that represents their likelihood to convert. Once we get those from our model, we want to pass those back into Google Marketing Platform so that we can retarget those customers. And again, just a part of this idea of taking a more sophisticated audience strategy. So kind of what I'm showing in my visual here is that we don't want to target everyone. We want to hone in on those customers who are closest to conversion so we can target them at the right time and with the right messaging. So as an example, suppose we had two customers, again, A and B, and we wanted to know if we should retarget them. So we build our model and we predict, and we find, what is the probability that they'll convert in the next 3 days, the next 7 days, the next 14 days. And customer A is far more likely to convert across all 3 time horizons. And now knowing that they have a decently good chance of converting, I can also predict, well, what is the category that they're most likely to purchase from? And then that helps me even more put the right messaging in front of them at the right time. Whereas with customer B, their behaviors online are not signaling that they're close to conversion, so I'm better off not trying to target them right now, and instead focusing on those customers who are showing that they're close to being ready to convert. So this is the same visual I shared with the slides on CLB, but it's the exact same idea. We're taking our data from our different sources, whether it's GA, customer data, whatever, integrating that together, building this data set, running our models, passing those predictions back into GA360, where those audiences can be shared with other products. So the ecosystem in this case is exactly the same, but just the use case is a little different. CLV is that holistic metric that represents the customer's lifetime value to the organization, Whereas propensity modeling is a bit more tactical. We're focused on, which are the customers, how to identify those customers who are ready to convert right now and target them better. So the other benefit that comes out of building a propensity model is that we can identify what I like to call conversion drivers and blockers. So by understanding the model results and kind of being able to quantify those patterns that are observed across our entire customer base, we can identify that there are some interactions on the user's journey that are helping them to convert, and that there are other interactions that might actually be hindering or blocking them. So this can definitely help us when it comes to designing the journeys and experiences that we want customers to have, and can help us when optimizing particular pages or experiences to try to break down those barriers. So for example, what we get from the model is that we get a ranked list of the user interactions that we've analyzed based on how they impact the expected conversions. So what we typically find is that there are some user interactions that are strongly predictive of converting. So if a user does X, they are more likely to convert later on. So for example, the live chat, when a user interacted with live chat, their percentage change in expected conversions was 157%. So they were more likely to convert if they had interacted with live chat. However, what we also found is that there were some interactions that were actually associated with lower conversion rates, such as the blog. So the way we interpreted this was, to kind of take a step back and rethink about the purpose of our site, and realizing that the blog articles were designed to drive people to convert, but that they weren't. And so what we were able to do is look at those pages, find, actually there were some issues with how those pages were designed, that they really weren't, from a layout perspective, designed to funnel people toward converting. And so knowing that, we were able to understand why we were seeing these results from the model and propose opportunities for optimization to eliminate those pages being a blocker to conversions. So being able to use the model results in this way also helped in better designing customer experiences and understanding what the user's journey looked like, and how we can better funnel people to have the journey that we want. So to wrap up with our discussion of propensity modeling, here are the basic needs. So we need that hit level unsampled analytics data stored in BigQuery. When it comes to actually running these models, basically the same idea as we had with CLV. Depending on your maturity with Google Cloud, you can do all of your modeling using different cloud products, especially due to how much data that you have and processing power, that certainly might be necessary. But that doesn't mean that for a proof of concept, you can't run these models locally or in an environment where your team's more comfortable. So again, it just depends on your current level of maturity and how you want to do it. And then, if you do pick to run things outside the cloud, just know that, to build out a fully scalable automated solution, you will have to migrate that over at some point in time. So the next piece you need is that analyst or data scientist who can create your data set that you'll use for modeling. Then you'll need a data scientist to fit, evaluate, and interpret the models. And again, our team, we use R and Python for that. And then finally, you'll need an analyst to import the probability scores that come out of the model back into GA360. Okay, so now that we've gone through our 2 use cases, let's take a moment to talk about how to actually get started. So here are 4 things that you can do right now to get started with Google Cloud. So the first one is to identify where your organization sits on the maturity framework. So think about those 6 Ps of digital analytics strategy. Think about how your team is currently using cloud, and diagnose, where you fall on that continuum of analytics maturity. Once you know that, put together an actionable 6 to 12 month plan so that you can grow into being more sophisticated in how you use these tools. So what skills you need, what products, services you need, or help that can help you to move up to being in the multi-moment stage. This is a big one. Getting that integration set up between Google Analytics 360 and BigQuery. It's not hard to set up. So for our GA360 clients out there, do it. You can't get started until you have that data in BigQuery. And that'll allow you to more effectively and efficiently reach and measure your highest value customers. So definitely do that one. And then finally, if you're stuck, if you need help, consider a partner. So to wrap up our webinar for today, I want to share with you one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite thought leaders in the analytics space, Avinash Kaushik. And he says, "The root cause of failure in most digital marketing campaigns is not the lack of creativity. It is quite simply the lack of structured thinking about what the real purpose of the campaign is and a lack of an objective set of measures." And the reason I like to close with this is because it ties back to where we started with today's presentation around thinking about long-term success, what is the purpose behind our digital analytics strategy, and not losing sight of that as we expand out and grow into using new tools and platforms. Thank you for your attention and for attending our webinar today. I want to call your attention to another webinar that I particularly think that this audience might be interested in. My colleague Melanie Bowles will be doing a webinar on February 13th. She is our optimization A/B testing, one of our optimization A/B testing experts, I should say. And she is going to talk to you about creating a winning A/B testing strategy with Google Optimize. So if you are interested in learning more about site optimization, head over to InfoTrust.com and get registered for that webinar with Melanie. So thank you very much for your attention. I will now take a look at the questions that have been submitted to take some time to answer those. Okay, so the first question we got is, what about regular Google Analytics? So this is a great question. Thank you for bringing this up. The integration between Google Cloud and Google Analytics exists only for Google Analytics 360 customers. So despite the standard free version of GA having almost the same functionality as GA360, that is actually one of the features that is not available to GA standard users. So yeah, so unfortunately, that is not an option. Another question that we got is CLB in this case primarily for remarketing strategies? That's a great question. I like to highlight it in terms of remarketing strategies, but that's not the only way that you can use it. Another really interesting use case for CLB is being able to, I guess, build that into acquisition strategies, because the nature of CLB being this holistic view of customers of value, and then if we know how we've targeted that customer and how much we've invested in them over time, I think that can add a really valuable layer to make sure that we're still profitable in how we're targeting these customers, and maybe when to not target them anymore, if they don't have the potential for future revenue. So I think, actually, kind of to sum this back up, there are different ways you can use it, but the applications, at least that I've seen and have been personally involved with, have been most heavily in like the remarketing space. And then the last question that we have, thinking of Kubernetes for the analytics computational needs, but can regular GA be used in conjunction with custom tools on Markov attribution, etc.? So let me think about this for a moment. So if you have any clarifying comments on this as I start to answer, feel free to type them in. But when it comes to regular GA, you still do have access to the reporting API, the real-time API, multi-channel funnels API. So you can get a lot of data by using those different APIs. And especially when it comes, like, you can, I was actually just in a conversation about this today. You can do some Markov attribution type stuff. I don't want to go into that right now, but so yes, I think the short answer is using the various APIs that you have access to with regular GA, you can do some stuff. So please don't walk away thinking like, oh, I have regular GA, I can't do any advanced analysis. You can. One thing that would certainly help in doing that is passing a user ID into Google Analytics as a custom dimension, because that will allow you to begin building a user level data set of different interactions, events, page views, etc. But really, I mean, when it comes to any of the projects that we do, we want to go to BigQuery because that's the easiest way for us to know that we're getting all of the data we need to do this type of project. Okay, a couple other questions have come in. Let me just take a moment to read these. Okay, so this question is, what about the usage of other systems such as Zapier, Stitch, and other API platforms that allow for regular GA to integrate with BigQuery? So that's a really good question. I will answer very hesitantly. I have a very basic understanding, I think, of what these tools are doing that are allowing them to integrate regular GA with BigQuery. So to be clear, I mean, it's obviously possible. And so you that is, yeah, you could do that. I personally don't have any experience with using those tools. So can't speak too much to that, but I would say, because we're talking about standard GA, you would be bound to the limitations of the APIs that are available to regular GA. So I think some of the things I had mentioned before are still relevant. But yes, I think all that's kind of coming back to, it's not that you can't do anything with standard GA, but it is a bit more difficult, and track user ID, that is one thing that definitely can help. Okay. All right. And the last comment I got in here is that Apogee may help you guys with your various systems too. All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your attention and the good questions that we got. So thank you very much for attending our webinar, and stay tuned for future InfoTrust webinars and check out Melanie's. All right, signing off. Thank you. Goodbye.